Hey everyone, Marco Bucci here. You know, as a professional artist and illustrator, you want to be able to handle a wide variety of assignments. Now, when it comes to color, that means knowing your fundamentals, both in theory, as well as the myriad of ways those theories can be applied. As an illustrator now for more than 15 years, I find that time and time again I go back to a core set of fundamentals. Fundamentals that allow me to survive in color. So, welcome to my Color Survival Guide, where I want to share these fundamentals with you. There are 6 chapters. Each chapter contains a presentation of a particular color theory, and then moves into its practical use, how I apply it, but also ideas for how you can apply it, concepts that'll fuel your day-to-day work. My goal with this class is simply to make you more confident in being able to handle a wide variety of color tasks. Now, quick note, I'll be using Adobe Photoshop in this presentation as my software of choice, but the concepts and demonstrations are applicable to any digital painting app. In fact, the theories presented are even applicable to traditional media. So, I'm confident you'll enjoy this class. We've got about 4 hours of learning ahead of us, so let's dive into chapter 1.
Hello, Marco.
Hey.
How's it going today?
I'm great. How are you, Steven?
It's all right so far.
Thanks for having me. This is awesome.
Yeah, thank you. Today, we're joined by Marco Bucci, the Bucci blog on most social networks.
Yep.
A hero and legend of painting. I think today he's going to be sharing some different things with us. Marco, what do you want to share today?
Well, I figure we should talk about just designing your paintings with color and light, really, because a lot of the time people start with like a line drawing, which is very common and totally a great way to work. I've learned in my own career and my own art as a hobby too, I'm so interested in capturing color and light that I kind of design my pictures with that kind of first and foremost. And I incorporate color and light with things like shapes and composition and things like that. So today I kind of just wanted to just talk and answer questions, but specifically targeted on kind of my approach to image making. And we'll talk about some fundamentals of color and light along the way, of course, things that are kind of tried and true and how nature works and how you can push it in your work. And yeah, all of this stuff is kind of explained in detail in my class, The Art of Color and Light, my class, Color Survival Guide. But let's talk about some key features of that class here, and we'll just answer some questions and try to clear up some mystery about it.
Yeah. So one of the things that does bring us here is that course is currently on sale for 20% off. If you use that code kangaroo. If you're in the know on the meme, I swear one day we'll stop referencing it. But yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and change the screen over and let's see Marco do some awesome things.
All right. That's when Stan tried to draw the kangaroo, right?
Yeah, it did not go great. He says that he wasn't trying to draw a kangaroo. And yeah, that's definitely what ended up happening. Not drawing a kangaroo.
That's great. So hopefully everyone can see my screen. And basically, for everyone watching, shoot questions in the chat. I'll be happy to get to those. If I can support it with little pictures or quick Google searches or quick demos, I will. And from here, I'm just going to start talking about what I'm doing here. This is a painting I'm working on. It's a work in progress. It's not finished, but it's like 80%, let's say. And I just want to kind of use this as a framework to talk about the lighting and color that I'm getting at. And what we can do from there is talk about how the decisions I made along the way to get here, because obviously this painting has a bunch of illustration-y stuff. Like there's a lot of texture to the brush strokes, and there's a lot of, finished statements to how I want to communicate things. Like the flowers are, the thing that's not done, by the way, is like the flowers. I'm still working on figuring out how those work. It's too cluttered. Like this is too cluttered right now compositionally. I have to figure out some more like light and shadow stuff to get those shapes working better. But lighting and color wise, this is essentially what I'm going with. So, what I like to do here, and I'll get into some like fundamental demos in just a second, maybe while people filter in. But like what I'm doing now, for people wondering about process, I specifically wanted to bring this illustration up because it's, like I said, 80% in. And usually when I live stream, like the last live stream I did with Proko, the Proko guys, I could only get 40% or 50% into the picture. So this time I'm like, let's start with something that's well along, and then I can back up from there instead of starting from nothing and moving forward. Yeah. So what I'm doing here, I'm thinking that I'll show you what I'm thinking about the light right now. Let me just zoom out a little bit so you can see the whole thing. The light is obviously coming down this way. It's sunlight, a summer afternoon kind of thing. You've got my green monster character that I've painted a million times and his little friend here. And really what that means is the light is going to play a huge role in composition, because composition is all about shapes, right? So let me just do something here. I will convert this to black and white. And then this is what I like to do when evaluating light shapes. I'll just ramp up some basic contrast here using the legacy Photoshop filter. And I'll even do that again because I maxed it out. So about like that. And then what I will do is go into filter gallery, and that loads up, and I'll give it I like to use brush strokes here, I think, for this. The angled strokes filter. There we go. And what this shows me, and you can see it, hopefully, I'll even do it again. Let that apply again. It's just kind of showing me the shapes that I'm working with. And so when we talk about color and light, obviously, the word color is kind of a seductive word for people, and me too. Like, I love color, but that's just the color part of color and light. The other part of light is values, right? And I'm sure you guys know, because the internet is full of information on this stuff now via Proko's channel, my own channel, and others. Light causes light and shadow shapes, and those shapes are responsible hugely for your composition and how clearly things read. So, like, if I were to make a new canvas here. Am I still there here, Stephen?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh,
yeah.
You popped off the screen, so I just want to make sure.
Yeah, I moved it. We do have a little bit of the little cursor issue where it's just repeating.
Oh, that's because I'm using my mouse. Here, I'll switch to my stylus. There we go.
Perfect.
It's weird. When I use my mouse, I get ghosted repeated cursors, but when I use my stylus, I don't. Very strange. Okay, so basically what I'm working with here is a bunch of shapes, right? Now, so as I do this, forget about the idea that this is a monster and a girl and a summer grassy landscape. Just think of shapes. So what we're doing here is we're breaking the canvas sort of into thirds this way, kind of like this, like a diagonal third. So like 1/3, 2/3, 1, 2, 3, and diagonal that way. And then from here, so if I were to break this composition down into its just the most basic thing, it's this. And then from there, obviously it's more complex than that, but these are the two shapes that I'm hinging everything on, that I'm building up. If this were a house, these are the foundations. Then from here, I am filling this big 2/3 space with smaller shapes. And I'm trying to make it so that when I do this, I'm really interested in making sure that this kind of line you can see in the illustration is still kind of there, kind of. I want it to be, I still want it to have its imprint on the composition. So when I put in like this monster character, I want to make sure that he exists in a way that doesn't disturb it too much. Now, he can break the shape a little bit. Like, he can break my 1/3 dark shape there a little bit. But obviously, just based on the logic of light, he would have to have a shadow cast over him. So that allows me then to take this line that used to cross the composition this way and kind of go over him like this, because he's got a belly, right? So it's a round shadow. The shadow has to track over his form. I'll bring this out a little bit like that. It's kind of like this now. So you can see, like, even right here, I've made the picture more complex by adding shapes. That's what adding shapes does to your compositions, makes them more complex. But I'm still trying to keep, this would be 2/3 and this is 1/3. So the rule of thirds is like a very basic understanding of composition that is not by any means a rule. It's unfortunate that it's called the rule of thirds. It's not a rule. It's just a guideline that you can follow if you want. Generally, things will look better if you start them on thirds. But anyway, a good artist will be able to break that. But I do like to start, at least, by putting things on thirds. And often stuff does end up, roughly on a third or a fifth or offset from the middle. Yeah, and then from here, it's like, okay, how can I add shapes that break up? I'm still interested in breaking up the bigger shapes being like this big dark that's still there and this big light that's still there. And I've started by breaking them up with other shapes like these, this shape here, this shape here. while hopefully still maintaining the bigger scheme. But it's like, okay, what else can I do? Well, if there's a character here, and this is how I determine where the character goes, right?
Mm-hmm.
I determine the attitude of the character later. Right now, it's composition. See, here's the thing. And sorry, I'm merging sentences together. I'm just excited. I'm excited to be here. If I move my picture way out, it's still readable, right? In fact, it's in a way, it's more readable when you see it this way, because you see the big relationships of shapes and forms. And what's not readable at this scale is what the character is doing. You can't tell. You can't tell that she. You can tell she's there, but you can't tell what she's doing. You can tell the monster's smiling because his mouth is a pretty large shape. Mm-hmm. But where the character goes is all related to the types of light and shadow shapes that you want. And what I'm trying to show here is how I determine that. And what I'm trying to do again is I start with the biggest possible relationships first. For those who missed it, it was just like this. It was basically the shapes were just like this. And now I'm trying to break into that structure by adding more shapes, but that doesn't disturb it. And it's all about your own visual analysis to determine whether you're disturbing it too much or not enough or whatever. One of the key principles I use, though, is the idea of overlap, meaning one shape is in front of another. Mm-hmm. Just to demonstrate this in 10 seconds, here's a shape and here's another shape. Those two shapes do not overlap. Usually a better idea is to have them overlap. And if you have them at different values, one like this, one like this, suddenly there's an interesting thing going on. One thing is behind another, values are interacting with each other. This tends to be a more interesting kind of approach to your shapes. Not to mention the fact that in real life, things overlap all the time. I'm sitting here in front of my wall. I've got you can see like a camera there in front of a door, things overlap. So make sure that when you're designing your compositions, you are cognizant of what is overlapping and by how much. Because I've been a teacher for more than 10 years now, probably like 13 years. I tell you, students are very shy about overlapping stuff. And I was too. Looking back at my old work, I could see it. And I think what it is that we spend so much effort drawing this stuff. We want to show it off. So we are shy about hiding something, right? By overlapping it. But the overlap is the key to getting interesting pictures.
Absolutely.
Now, go ahead, Stephen.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that there's so much more life to something that has actual depth and feeling, as opposed to something that's just some like loosely arranged, like single plane objects. There's a reason that a Wes Anderson film feels like it does, because everything is just on that single plane usually.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. And that's a good way to just remind everyone there are no rules. What I'm describing here are just principles that tend to work in this like entertainment style of art, like entertainment, concept art, illustration, modern ways of image making. Mm-hmm. This is generally what works. And, artist after artist, you'll see them do this, whether they talk about it or not. This is kind of what this is what they're doing on a fundamental level. Now, I want to merge shapes. So this big shadow in the background, I'll get back to color. Obviously this is a long stream. We'll get back to color. But light. Honestly, guys, this is more important. What I'm talking about now is more important than color. I can merge shapes. Like I can take this big dark shape and kind of merge it in with the girl here. Think of this as one of I think it was Morgan Weisling who said this, and I always remembered it. Imagine your values are like channels of water, and you are a little sailboat. There's a sailboat, and I can row my boat or sail my boat along the channels of value. In your pictures, you want to try and have enough channel water value where you can sail your boat kind of around the picture a little bit. So I can connect all of this. I can sail my boat through all of these values, up the girl's hair, down here, and into the monster's shadow. That's a healthy range of the picture. I can sail my little boat. And even the light too, I can kind of flow through here. Maybe I'm broken here by shadow, but I can kind of like maybe go here around the picture like this. You want to make sure you have these channels of connected values. And that's what makes your picture very readable. And that's all about managing big shapes, medium shapes, and small shapes. So right now I'm further kind of making shapes that are eventually going to show how these characters are rendered. But they are connected shapes of light and shadow. And even here, it's like this. And then from here, like that's basically the picture. I mean, obviously there's a little more, there's all these kinds of small shapes, but from here, what I can do is that's kind of like my big and medium shapes. And even down here, it merges out. And this is where I'm not done the picture yet. I'm still working on compositionally, but I am thinking about merging the darks up here to bring it back into the picture. Mm-hmm. Still doing my best to preserve, again, 2/3, 1/3. I'm still trying to keep that like DNA in the composition, because if you lose that, then you're just fighting against yourself, right? The decisions you make about composition as a discipline, you should try and hold true to them through to the end. That way you can evaluate if it works. If you are, and it's not a big deal if you start somewhere and then discard it and start again and an hour from now change your mind, like that's all fine. But as a art discipline, I'm very interested in, and I've always for many years have been interested in starting out with an idea of where this picture is going compositionally, like what I'm showing you here, and sticking with it and seeing if it works. Take it to its final conclusion and then evaluate it. Because a lot of people will try and evaluate their paintings and then like change course, and in that changing course you might affect your composition, and then because composition is such a fundamental property, like it underlies your entire picture. If you start changing composition an hour into a painting, yes, it can be done, but chances are you're going to uproot too much other stuff by doing that. Again, It's like ripping out foundations of a house while the house is half built. That's not going to work generally, not without a lot of surgery, right? So you got to make sure that you compositionally kind of know what you're after as early as possible. Okay, so then from here, just to finish this little quick demo, I'll just grab a little texture brush like this. From here, I'm starting to populate the light areas, my light 2/3, just with like more light patterns. So I'm mostly working in the light, and these are flowers and plants. And this is where I'll spend hours and hours figuring out exactly how many small shapes I need. So while, yes, these are flowers, I'm thinking of them simply as small shapes that interrupt the medium shapes. And I could think of the medium shapes as things that interrupt the big shapes. So it's this chain, big, medium, small. The smaller shapes are always kind of merging and intersecting and interrupting the bigger shapes, but while not disturbing that DNA of it, the distribution of 1/3, 2/3 that I've mentioned a few times. I don't want to disrupt that because that is a clear fundamental relationship. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So anyway, that's what I'm doing. I'll get back now to, I can still see a hovering cursor. Is that?
Yeah. Every once in a while it's popping up there.
Yeah. Sorry, guys. I don't know why that's doing that. I know it's annoying, but I honestly don't know how to fix that.
If you can take your mouse, like just move it so where it's like off screen.
Oh, yeah.
And then go back to using the tablet, maybe.
Let's see.
No, it's still.
I think it's gone.
I don't know.
Hey.
Seems good currently. We do have a couple questions.
Oh, yeah, please.
Yeah. So your mouse might cause issues, but people are curious about what tablet you use. The thing that does work.
Yeah, I use this is the Intuos Pro. And it's funny, I have you can't see it. Well, here you can. I have a Cintiq. This is the same Cintiq Stan has, the big one, the 32-inch. Mm-hmm. I don't use it. I use it as a monitor. I don't draw on it because I like it's a shame that I have it and don't use it. It's a great monitor, but I prefer, like, I can get distance, when I'm on my tablet, I can sit back. It's more comfortable for me. And also because, like, I'm pretty old. I'm 40 years old. I started doing this when I was like 20. Back when I was 20, Cintiqs didn't exist. So I got used to the tablet, the regular non-screen tablet. So it's kind of like an old man thing that I'm discussing here, where I'm just used to what I'm used to. I think if I were an artist starting more recently, I would love the Cintiq more than I do now.
Yeah, it definitely requires some brain switching.
Yeah, and I don't like being like this. It just, even when I'm painting, like oil painting or something, I like having a distance from the canvas. Mm-hmm. Okay.
So for the things that we're talking about today, they're going to be concepts that are in that course of yours that people can see the link in the description or in the chat here. So there are just a couple questions about that course, I think, or that pertain to the course.
Yeah, feel free.
So people were asking, would you recommend 3-value distillation studies for a beginner painter? And then a couple of others just about the courses that you have. Do you want to tackle the 3-value distillation question first?
Sure. Yeah, I do recommend that. In fact, in some of my mentorship classes, I have done exactly that assignment where you basically break down compositions like this, maybe a little bit more finished than what I just did there. You spend a little more time on it. But yeah, you break down compositions with, I don't limit it to 3. I kind of max it out at 5. I tell students you can use anywhere between 2 and 5. If you're in that range with the sweet spot being 3 or 4 values, then you're good. I think anything beyond 5 values is you're overthinking the composition, and you should condense and merge. But yes, absolutely, quick value studies, and do them with hard edges if possible. Like you notice in my little study here, all the edges are kind of like, pretty hard. I'm not trying to blend anything, right? They're pretty firm edges. I recommend doing that too, so you fully understand what the shapes are throughout. Okay. And then what was the question about my courses?
Yeah, so people were asking if you had a course that's for absolute beginners. I think this course is still, it doesn't require any particular skill level, at least that's what's listed. Right. But what would you recommend of your courses for a beginner?
Yeah, honestly, if you're an absolute beginner with painting, the Color Survival Guide will get you going. The Color Survival Guide doesn't cover drawing, though. Like, obviously, painting is not just color; it's drawing and perspective and all that drawing stuff. And I know you guys have tons of stuff on the Proko channel channel in your store about drawing. And eventually, I will release my own drawing class on Proko, I promise. But currently, if you're interested in color, yes, the Color Survival Guide will be beginner friendly. Mm-hmm. The roadblock you might face is drawing, which you'll have to shore up with other classes.
Yeah. Okay.
So just a quick note as I'm working on this shadow here, Stephen, then please hit me with a question.
Oh, no. I was saying take it away.
Oh yeah. So see the shadow on the monster's belly there? Like, I have to decide, first of all, something that's bugging me, and maybe you guys can tell me, I can get some feedback. That it's not drawing something. Okay, yeah. This shape here, that's supposed to be his arm, and I don't think it reads. I think I don't think it reads because I think it's too much of a tangent with the shadow shape, like that shadow shape kind of going like this. I think the arm is too tangential with all that. So I might take that away. But anyway, you guys can let me know. Let me know if you did read that as an arm or not. That'll determine the course I take with it. The other thing with the shadow is I have to make sure that these leaves, which I'm still working on, by the way, these leaves are a big pain for me. I don't really know what I'm doing there. I'll have to figure it out. There's too many shapes, but these leaves are a way of overlapping, adding small shapes to here. So I'm basically on a fundamental composition DNA level. This is what I'm doing. I'm disturbing this big dark shape with smaller shapes that add just a pleasant noise to it. And the thing about like our brain, our vision, and how we process pictures, it's just kind of like X-ray vision. I still know that behind this is a big dark shape. Even though I'm disturbing it with smaller shapes, my brain still says, hey, this is a big shape. It's kind of this cool way that we see. We're able to track big patterns of shapes, even though they are overlaid with other things. Mm-hmm. So with these leaves, and they're way too complex now, but I'm trying to find a way, and I'll just start doing it here. This is the actual painting file. Like I will say I'm actually painting my final here. And this is how I paint. I scribble around until like with a composition direction in mind, but I scribble around until I start seeing things that I'm liking. But again, I have that compositional idea in my head, so I know the direction of scribbles to take. And I'm trying to just find how many leaves is too much, how many is too little. And if you can see my layers, I'm basically on here. I'm on just one layer. All those layers you saw before were like there's like a shadow I was playing with here. I'll just merge this all down. I generally just paint on one layer, unless I'm trying something like overhauling, unless I'm trying to do too much surgery to it, I'll do it on a layer. But in general, I'm just on one layer here because it encourages me to make these big sweeping decisions. Mm-hmm. And if there's a question, Stephen, was there a question?
Not so far. Right now, I did run a poll to ask people if they saw it as an arm. 64% of people said no.
Said no, yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah, because I loaded it up and I forgot it was an arm. So yeah, it's got to go. So when something's not working, like not reading, you got to get rid of it. Unless you know a clear path to fix it. I don't know a clear path to fix that right now. It may be the fact that maybe the arm wouldn't be visible in this perspective because like it would be behind him. I could put it out here and actually see, this is where I'll use a layer. because I'm painting over some of my nice shapes. I do enjoy some of these shapes, how they're forming up here. Like the big, medium, small to me is somehow pleasing. Like I like when I look at these shapes, it's like this is a big shape. See this? It's kind of like a big shape interrupted by these little smaller shapes. And the smaller shapes have various sizes to them. It's not all the same size of small shape, but I like that relationship. It just looks good to me. And even here, this bit of light, if I'm tracing it the other way, this is a bigger shape that I can interrupt with, like maybe these little flowers, which are very abstract right now as you zoom in. I'll probably keep them abstract, but these little flowers can cast little shadows, right? And those shadows are smaller shapes. So this is where hours and hours of work comes in as I play with these relationships. So it's not like I'm never just like painting flowers. It's always a compositional assessment first. And then, you know, thanks to digital being so forgiving, I can paint over things and whatever. But the same is true with oils or acrylics. Not so much watercolor, but I do, even when I work traditionally, I do paint over this stuff a lot. And like the tree, obviously there are trees off screen casting shadows on the ground. That's what these shadows are. I could have little leaves. I can sample a shadow here, and I can have little leaves like casting shadows like this into my light shape. And this is also a way of breaking up that bigger light shape with a very believable thing, with shadows coming from a tree, right? So it's believable on a literal level, shadows coming from a tree, which you'd expect in a picture like this. And also it's pleasing on a compositional level. Things, you know, dark shapes breaking up lighter shapes. And what I might do, go ahead.
I was going to say, after you finish this section here, there were a couple questions that I think would be foundational from going from the black and white layout into actual color.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
So people were asking a couple different things. How you chose the local values of those objects and characters in the paintings, and then also how you determine how far you take something in saturation.
Okay, let's start with the first one because it's value-based, and I always like value-based stuff because it'll take you the furthest, but then obviously you'll get into the color one. And please remind me, Stephen, about the color question after I'm done the value one, because I'll probably forget what the question was.
Yeah.
This is the saturation question. Okay, so what I like to do is first, the first thing you have to do is determine what's in light and what's in shadow. And then from there, you can evaluate from there. So, okay, for example, this monster is partially in light, like this is light, and then he's in shadow here. And let me just get rid of these shapes I put in. So yeah, obviously we have light and shadow divided by this line here. And by the way, this is also shadow down here. So what I'm thinking is I want to make the monster a local value that is able to read off of the grass in light and the dark trees in shadow. So what I chose to do is I chose to go, if we're thinking three values sort of, I chose to go very dark with the shadows here, and then the lightest with the monster, and kind of a medium light with the grass. And what that allows is for the monster to be a hair lighter in value in the light, so he still reads off of the grass. Like if I made that value, if I made the monster too low in value, well, now he's just merging with the grass, and that's no good. You'll still be able to read him because the shadows are darker, so like the shadows will cut him out. But I also want you to be able to see a distinction in edge here where the light meets the light. The light of the monster meets the light of the grass. So I chose a local value for the monster simply that was a hair higher than the local value for the grass. I could have inverted that, and this is where this is a very good question. I could have inverted that. Like I could have just pick the grass value and throw that here, and then pick the, now obviously when I do that, I have to darken the shadows accordingly to make sure that they're darker than that, right? Because I'm changing the light value now. So I could have done this, and then made the grass lighter. And honestly, it's up to you or up to me which one's better. Like this could work. This could absolutely work. I'm like, maybe that's a better decision. I chose the other one for some reason. And I think it's because I think generally when things are the lightest things can contain more contrast, because the light, if it's lighter, it can contrast more with the dark, right? That's just basic separation of values. So if I make the monster the lightest, then I have the most potential contrast with him, and I want him to be the focal point. So that, to me, that makes logical sense why I would make the monster the lightest. Now, in shadow, I don't want the shadows of the monster to do this. This is merging too much. I think it doesn't. I still want the silhouette of that monster to be nice and round and friendly. I don't want to lose that egg-shaped silhouette. So now you can start thinking about keeping your shadows all in shadow. That is, the darkest, the shadows are always darker than the lights. So you can still keep that relationship, but you can have minor differences in your shadows. So like the monster shadow, because the monster is such a bright character, even his shadows can be lighter than the shadows of the trees. I wonder if I can quickly search something. I learned this from Scott Christensen. I'm just Googling. Hang on, folks. Painting. Scott Christensen. Here we go. I'll just go to my images. You can see this, right, Stephen?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, cool. Hey, there's Scott. I took a workshop with Scott way back in 2008. And honestly, it was kind of a revolutionizing experience for me. And what I learned from Scott, well, many things, but one of the things Scott really helped me understand, let's look at this landscape here. You guys can see on the right. He talks about lessons he learned from a painter named John Carlson. John Carlson, I think, passed away a few decades ago, I think. But anyway, he has a book called Landscape and Composition or something like that. John F. Carlson, you can Google him. But John F. Carlson talks about the 4 planes, the 4 value planes. The lightest, let me get out of here. My cursor is being weird. The lightest is the sky. The second lightest are slanted planes like mountains. Then the third lightest, the lightest is the sky. The second lightest is the ground. The third lightest is slanted planes like rocks and mountains. Then the fourth, the darkest, the fourth lightest or the darkest is your trees. So whenever I have trees, especially trees in shadow, that's where it's almost a no-brainer. Those are going to be your darkest values because that's how trees literally trap the light in real life. So that's how they suck in light. They're designed to. That's how they feed themselves, right? With photosynthesis and light. So if you have a tree in your composition, this is a good example. Here, I'll bring this in to Photoshop. This is a Scott Christensen painting, and I'll just throw it into grayscale. Notice how the trees are darker, even these light trees. Well, this is maybe not the best example because they're very light trees, but these trees, even though they're light colored leaves, they're darker. But look at the shadows though. The shadows right in here, and you can see my color picker. It's the shadows of the trees that really give you your darkness. So the darkest values in this picture are in these trees. And then even the shadows on the grass, see right here is like a shadow on the grass, and I'm sampling a few of them. They're lighter. So the trees categorically are darker. Anyway, all that to say, because I had trees in this picture, I kind of knew that they would support this dark value. The monster, on the other hand, being much lighter than a tree, I kind of pictured him like, bright grass in color. He can have lighter shadows. So that's how you can keep things separate. That's how you can help choose your local values, is by picking values that are contrasting where you need them. And then also making sure that when those objects fall into shadow, that you still keep those values close. If you look at the shadow of the monster and then the shadow of the tree, they're going from, you can see the value kind of jumping in this range. That's still close enough to group them as shadows. And it gives me all this range up here for the lights. Okay, that was a bit of a jumbled explanation
No, this is great.
So hopefully it works.
Usually the thing that I think someone will probably want to ask is, how did you make that image go grayscale when you wanted to check it?
Oh, image mode, grayscale.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
No problem. Or in Photoshop, you could set up a shortcut, which I actually don't have set up right now.
You set it up for Control Y?
Yeah, Control Y. I actually can't even remember where that is. It's somewhere in here.
Yeah.
Set up something in here.
Yeah, usually if you guys,
I'm not even gonna fumble with that because I actually can't remember how to do it.
Yeah, if you guys go to do Control Y, the thing that you'll end up seeing suggested is that it'll just toggle between like your 2 color modes, and so the
CMYK,
first one that it'll go to is going to go between RGB and CMYK.
Right.
But you can set that to do that as a hotkey.
That's right. Yeah. If I had a few minutes, I'd figure out how to do it, but that would be not good for a live stream.
Yeah. Don't worry, Natalia. I promise it's gonna come back up. The next thing to go from the black and white, where you're actually just determining what you're doing for your layout, would be how do you make sure that you're not going to go too saturated or just choose your saturation in general?
Okay, this is where we can start talking about breaking down little thumbnails. Let's do that. Let's take, you know what? Let's go here. I'm just on my other screen for a second, folks, and I'm going to bring up a picture. Let's do maybe this one here. Okay. This is a photograph, Arizona, I think. I did not take this photo. I just found it on Google, so I don't know who to attribute it to. I apologize for that. But I'm going to put a sphere in this photo in 2 different places. Now, this is something I do in the color survival guide. There's a whole chapter on studies like this, but I'll quickly go through it here. So the first idea is, let's pick a local color. What, red? You like the red, Steven?
Absolutely.
Okay, I like red. I like red too. So let's, I'll just make a new layer just for fun. Okay, so let's make a red ball and let's put it in the sun. Okay, so there's going to be a red ball right there. Let me just make this canvas a bit larger so you can all see it. These are fundamental practices you can do that are, again, described in more detail in the course, but let's go through this. So that's going to be a red ball, and it's going to be sitting like against the cliff. Right now, it doesn't look like that at all because, first of all, there's no light applied to it. There's no cast shadow on the cliff. Mm-hmm. Right now, this is way too flat, but at least we have a position for our ball. We have to determine, and again, this is all about choosing saturation and color and stuff. We have to determine what the colors of light and shadow are going to be. Now, what I'm going to suggest to you, the first concept of light I'm going to suggest to you is light. The light source is a bully. This is what I call it in my course. It's a bully. It's not the best. It's not the most friendly term in the world. I know we don't like bullies, but the light is a bully, meaning that color-wise, the light's color is going to infiltrate everything and bully things into being like it. So all this to say, if we were to sample this cliff, which is obviously hit by a late afternoon golden sun, right? Mm-hmm. When you think golden sun, you think yellows and oranges, saturated yellows and oranges, right? So when I'm color sampling this cliff, look at my color picker. Don't even look where I'm sampling. Just look at my color picker. Notice that those colors, let's notice 2 things about the color. The main thing to notice is that hue-wise, like on the hue picker, the hue spectrum, they are locked in here, like in this very narrow range. Again, sampling lights right now of the cliff. And look at that. They're barely moving, right? Mm-hmm. That's because that sun is consistently bullying these colors to hit that same range, because that's kind of the range that the sun would be in. I don't know the exact color of the sun in this light, but it's somewhere in the golden, orangey yellows, right? Somewhere in there. So it wants the colors to be like that. And sunlight is very strong. The stronger the light, the stronger the bully effect. Sun is a very strong light, so that bully is going to be at maximum strength here. You would almost be guaranteed when you're painting, if you're painting this, a lighting like this, picking your colors in the light is easy, because if you know where that sun color is, let's say, you kind of know that you're going to be in this range. And the saturation we're choosing here is pretty maxed out because it's a late afternoon sun. That sun is very saturated at that time. In a more noon sun, maybe I'll pull up a noon photo after this, it'd be a bit less saturated because the sun actually changes saturation as it goes through the day. Now, let's use that principle to inform the color choice of our red sphere. So we got a red sphere, and I just picked a neutral red. It's a kind of in the middle. There's nothing, it's kind of in the middle of the red spectrum. So it's not being bullied by that sunlight. That's problem number 1 right now. So how do we fix that? Well, I know I'm going to be taking this red closer to the golden oranges, but because the ball is red is, a few steps away from orange. I don't have to go all the way up to that. I can go just toward it. So I'll go like somewhere here into like reddish orange. Obviously, I'll also raise the value to be lighter because it's a light thing that we're painting right now. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if that's the right color, but I do know that I have a good shot of it being in the right direction. So let's see, I'll put in this light as if the sunlight is hitting this ball like this. And this is a good start because instantly what I have now is a warm versus cool relationship. And because I've decided that my sunlight is already very saturated, I'm allowed to make that ball as saturated as I want because it kind of goes with the rest of the environment. If that environment were way less saturated, like let's say the photo looked like this, well, suddenly that saturation is incorrect because it's jumped out of context with the rest of what the light is doing. So when you're painting light, the main thing to think about is how saturated is your sunlight in this case. I have a photo here. Here's a photograph where the sunlight is not so saturated. This is obviously a soccer stadium or something like that. Kind of like, what do you call it? Like a 1 p.m., 2 p.m. kind of sunlight.
Yeah.
Maybe closer to noon. Notice how this sunlight, if I were to paint this ball, let's start with the same red. If I were to put this red, paint the light here, well, now that sunlight is less saturated. It still wants to make things closer to the yellows. Sunlight tends to be closer to the oranges, yellows than it is into the reds.
Mm-hmm.
The only time you'll ever see a red sun is when things are on fire, or like forest fires, which is going on in Eastern Seaboard right now.
Yeah,
you guys probably know the sun when it sets here is very red. It's kind of scary. Anyway, other than that, the only time you see a red sun is like deep sunset. So sun colors are generally up here. But in this case, I can make that red less saturated and it will start working, maybe a little more orange, because this sun color is less saturated. So number one influencer of light saturation colors is make sure you know what the saturation of your actual light source is. And by the way, this is not even an artistic thing. You can look up charts of this. Like you can go type in Kelvin chart light. If I just typed in Kelvin chart light, and you can find graphics like this that tell you where different light sources are. Like there's a candle right there. I don't know if you can read this on screen. This says candle, and it points to that color. This is all scientifically measured, and there's all kinds of charts that can help you out here. So I don't really use those charts, really. I just paint outdoors a lot, and I have a mental catalog of where these colors exist.
Mm-hmm.
So from here, and I can make this color a bit redder if I want, but keeping the same sort of saturation. I can mix a bit of red in there. I can mix a bit of yellow, orange in there. Keep your values consistent, though. And any of these hues will work as long as I'm sort of in the right level of saturation. If I were back here, well, suddenly that doesn't work anymore. I've desaturated it too much for this light source because I know the sun is warm. So there's no reason for me to go into the grays. In my color survival guide, I talk a lot about how grays are a transport system between warm and cool. There's the entire chapter 1 is about that, and it's like a few hours long. So obviously I'll save it for the course. But if you go too gray, I'm cooling the color off too much. So I want to make sure I'm into saturation enough where I'm in my sun color vicinity. If you're wondering, well, how do I know where the sun color vicinity is? Well, take a photograph like this and just start sampling various colors in the light. Just pick anything in the light, be it a seat in the stadium or a piece of the ground of various locations on the ground. And, pick red colors in the light here. Pick like saturated reds in the light, pick desaturated ground colors like this, and then kind of like take your color picker and just sample them and just kind of see what the range of saturation is. And like, that what looks white, like that ground looks like it's like a white canvas. Mm-hmm. What does white look like under this sunlight? Well, it's kind of this yellowish gray. What does very saturated red look like? Well, it can be over there. Make sure you kind of have a range of saturation in mind. So then let me go back to this one. Then for the shadow needs to be different than the light because the shadow is actually, let me go back to my main photo. There we go. The shadow is the absence of the direct light, right? So if you think of the light as being like a bully, well, suddenly the shadow is free of that bully. It doesn't have to deal with it because that's what shadow is, the absence of direct light. The bully effect can only happen in direct light. Shadows are indirect light. So we have a whole lot more freedom with our shadow colors. If I just start sampling shadow colors here, you can see that they can dip into the magentas, and even this photo is quite warm overall, but these shadows are dipping into even purples, magenta grays. I just had one there. There it is, something like that. I even had a more magenta a second ago. You can see a whole wide range of saturation here in these colors. There's like a magenta gray right there. And that's because the bully does not affect the shadow. So the shadows get their light from different sources. Now, what are those sources? Well, it's ambient light. Shadows get their light from huge different players like the sky. That sky is shining down into this valley, imparting its blue. If we just sample the sky, we can see this blue. That blue is existing all over this landscape, mixed in with reflected light from the sun. Reflected light being those really hot sun rays striking the rock and distributing, bouncing around in the bottom too. So this shadow area at the bottom is a combination of bounced light from the sun, which we know is extremely warm, and cool light from the sky, which we know is pretty cold. Like I just sampled the sky because I can see it. There's the sky color. That's a pretty cold color especially in comparison to the sun, right? Which is like in these hot yellows. That motivates all kinds of mixtures in the middle. So if we have our sun color here and our shadow color, well, we don't know what our shadow color is. Our shadow color is a mixture of this plus like a blue. Let me just sample it. Let me just go like this. This is blue, right? We're saying this is a blue.
Yeah, it looks like a blue to me.
Yeah. So there we go. So what do those colors make when they mix? Well, first you can just use Photoshop and just see. You can pick that, and mix them and see what you kind of get. These grayish blues, grayish greens. You can start there. Obviously, now you got to get the value right. So we can like drop this to a shadow value. And look at that. It works. It sits in the space because, well, A, it's the right value, but B, it's the right level of saturation for this particular light setup. Outdoor light is very friendly to paint because almost always when you're painting a sunny day, you're going to be dealing with warm light from the sun and comparatively cooler light from the sky. So for those of you who are, maybe starting out with painting or more on the beginner side, paint sunlit days and try and do it from life if you can. But even a photo works because it's very predictable what your two opposing light sources will be. You'll have a bully sun for the sunlight areas, and then you'll have a mixture of that indirect light bouncing from the sun and the blue sky.
Okay.
Yeah. So because I'm in this gray, which is a cooler, again, this is very much explained in the color survival guide, but in this case, gray is a way of cooling off a warm color. Like if I wanted to take this orange and cool it off, well, there's two ways I could do that. Probably I remember from grade school art class, that warm colors are like oranges and yellows and like cooler colors are blues, right? And that's true, but it's very limited. Another way to cool off this orange is simply desaturate it, because with gray, you can traverse from warm through gray all the way to cool. And I'll show you how that works with a little chart right here. If I have this warm orange, and I have it here, and I want to get cooler with it, I can just start decreasing saturation. And suddenly, I'm now in perfect gray. Like this is 100% gray right here. Every color has that gray in common. So because every color has that gray in common, I can pop out any hue I want. I can come out here in the blues, let's say, and do this and go back out here. So gray is a fantastic way of traversing warm to cool or cool to warm. So with this little chart in mind, this is one particular chart. The Color Survival Guide has 4 charts, but this is one particular chart. If I know that the grays are getting cooler, and I know that the shadows are not going to be as warm as the sun, therefore they're cooler, all I have to do is be in the grays and with the right values. And watch this. Like I'm just painting on this picture here, and without painting any detail or anything, I've just got like a texture brush like this. I can get any of these colors to work. Here's a greenish gray. It works, right? Like it feels like it sits in the picture. And that's because it's in the correct saturation. But the way I describe it in my course, I don't really use the word saturation so much as I use temperature. This is the correct temperature. Because when you're thinking saturation doesn't always equal warm and cool. Like if I saturated this blue, that's a very cold blue. But if I saturated this orange, Well, that's a very warm orange. So saturation right there, one was warm, one was cold. So the word saturation is not quite the best word because it's not as descriptive. It's not as it's not as descriptive as you need it to be. The words you need are warm versus cool, and that gets you thinking about where it is in the gray spectrum. So the other thing you can do now is, I know that sky is going to influence the ground quite a bit because the ground directly faces the sky, right? It points straight up. So if I'm painting colors on the ground, I'll probably be able to mix more blues into those colors. As you can see, it's working here because it's going to get more of that blue light. That blue sky is going to factor into the ground more. Versus if I'm painting the wall of this canyon here, well, I'll probably have to use less blue for that because it will probably get less blue light from the sky and more warmish light from the sun bouncing around. Like the sun might be able to like come in and strike the wall, strike this wall, and strike back here like that. It's way more dominated by the sun bounce, but it is going to get some blue. So probably what I'll do is the areas of this cliff that are more open to the sky, like this little spot here, let's say, I'll probably be able to get more blue in there. So like pick the blue, but still being in gray because I don't want the blue to be too much. If it's too much, let me get a brush. If it's too much, it starts jumping out of context. That is too blue because that doesn't respect the fact that there's also a warm sun bouncing around. So if I want that blue to sit in better, saturation wise, I have to warm it up. Now, how do I warm up the blue? I make it grayer because that brings it toward the oranges or the sun colors in this case. And that's too light. That value is too light. So let's darken it down. Still too light. It's too dark. There we go. So this will work. This blue will work. And then as I get into these crevices in here, in this range here, I will want to warm that blue up, maybe by adding some magenta to it, moving away from the blues, going up here, and maybe increasing the saturation a little bit, but still leaving most of the saturation for the sun in this case, and getting some more reds. And look at that. Without even color sampling, I'm basically right on the money with the photo. Again, this is all described in better structured and more detail in the course, but this is what I'm thinking. So back to our ball. I want to pick a shadow color. Well, already I have a shadow color by default because I created a light color. So that gives me a shadow color already. And let's analyze the relationship very quickly between what I've chosen here. So there's my light, which as you can see is this bright orangey thing, which represents a red that's been bullied by the orangey sun. My shadow, on the other hand, has moved away from it. So let's sample my light. My shadow, look at my color picker here. My shadow has done this. It's moved away from the bully sunlight, and it's gotten darker and grayer. It's about there. I can even make it more gray. That's good. Now, I think it's too light. So all I'm going to do to adjust it is I'm going to make it darker, maybe even a bit grayer. Again, I need to be on here. Again, gray being a good way of getting a cooler red. I can gray it down. I can also make it more purple. Maybe something in this range. And feel like I don't feel the need to fully cover this sphere with this color. I'm doing this thing called scumbling. Scumbling strokes look like this, kind of scribbles, but directional scribbles. So I'm scumbling in my colors, and I'll sample Photoshop's mixture of these colors, and I'll scumble them in like this. And then what I can do is let's have a cast shadow on the canyon wall so we can kind of position it in space. And I'll just sample one of my colors I already picked and explain to you guys here. I'll just sample this. It was kind of a bit bluer than that. And I'll just throw this here. And this is looking too blue to me, just visually. There's too much blue in it. And that makes sense because there's so much sun in that area that warm sun would invade the shadow with more warmth because it's so close to it. So what I'm going to do, I'm not going to color sample. I can color sample what I've painted, but I'm not going to color sample the picture. I'll color sample what I've painted and say, okay, that's a warm blue, but it's still too cold. So what I'm going to do is warm it up even more. How can I do that? Well, I could just make it gray, which is closer to the warms, put that in. Notice how it doesn't look gray, right? It looks like a color because gray is a color. There's no such thing as like gray, really. Gray is a concept, not a color. Okay.
It's a state of mind.
Yes, we're really deviating from this podcast now. Okay, from this live stream. Okay, but that's still too blue. That gray is still too blue. So what I want to do is warm it up even more. So I've exhausted my blues because I'm at full gray. So what I'll do is I'll make it warmer by moving away from the blues. I'll go up the color wheel here and maybe even all the way around like to this range here. And let's bring that in saturation wise. Remember my gray chart that I did a second ago? I should have left that on the screen. But now I can, here we go. This is starting to look more like the shadow. The shape is wrong. The shape of the shadow is wrong. Oops. I'm going to paint it right into here. I need to make sure it's a spherical, circular shadow shape like this. And even more orange, maybe. This is where you can play. Color is fun. You can play with it. And look at my scumbling. If you can see my stylus, I'm scribbling and scumbling this shadow shape in. And what I might even do is make it warmer closer to the red ball, because that red and the cliff would be bouncing light in here, causing more of an orangey red thing. And then maybe as the shadow leaves the sphere, like as the shadow gets to this range, more of that blue sky is able to invade it. So what I'll do, and this is a classic relationship you'll see all the time in people's paintings and nature, is I'll take my shadow and just switch into the blues and give it more of a blue feel. I'll even get an airbrush for this. Scroll up here. There we go. Grab myself an airbrush and just softly give it this blue thing. And this will make it feel like the sky is able to get in there. Now, there is one more sneaky value called ambient occlusion. It's a word invented by programmers, which is why it sounds so weird, but it is a very good term. Ambient being the ambient light, and which is shadow, right? Shadow is ambient light, which is indirect light. And occlusion being things that are blocked. So ambient occlusion is light, ambient light that is blocked. Where is ambient light blocked? It's blocked in the tightest crevices of your painting. So like where the sphere, if that sphere is resting against the rock wall, which I'm saying it is, there's a tight crevice here where the sphere meets the wall. That's a very tight space. If you see my hands, like where my fingers meet, it's a very tight space. Like I can show you my hands. Hang on. If I cut my hands enough, like you can see how dark it is right where the meeting point of my fingers is. That's ambient occlusion, because not a lot of ambient light can enter those areas. So what I do is I'll just get a multiply brush, which I have, as a default right there. And I'll just hit this crevice spot with a darker, hold on, I got to merge this down. There we go. Oops, sorry. I'll hit this little crevice area with a darker value. And that is the ambient occlusion effect, where this ball, and it affects both the sphere and the wall. Paint it very quickly like this. And that is where that ball meets the wall. And I can brush into that and make the strokes. Obviously, in my personal illustrations, I'm very interested in making the strokes also fun. I'm not doing that here. I'm just kind of like painting the colors and values. Obviously, in my personal work, right, I spend a great deal of time like making sure the strokes are fun to look at. In fundamental study like this, don't do that. Don't worry about your brushwork. Just try and get the read happening. And the color survival guide is mostly based on that. Now, from here, the last thing I can do, and then this has turned into a kind of an expanded version of an answer to this question, but I hope it's helpful to everybody.
Yeah, it's great.
Cool. I can think of, well, the sphere in shadow up here, or the sphere in shadow right here. Well, that is also going to be affected by the sky in some places. Where would those places be? Well, it's very easy to determine that. It's the place that is most available to the sky, which is the top. So like the sky is able to shine down. Obviously, it's shining from off screen left too, right? Because there's sky there too. It's going to hit this part of the sphere. The sky is not going to do anything at the bottom, because the sky and the ambient light is not strong enough to bounce that much. The sky is too weak to do this, to come down, hit the floor, and bounce up. The sky can't do that. That's only sunlight can do that. It's too much space for it to travel. And you'll get a sense for the strength of light if you paint a lot from life, honestly. But I know that the skylight is not going to be a consideration there, but it is going to be a consideration there. So I'll pick where I'm at. I always like to sample where I'm at. So let's just sample that color. And then I'll say, okay, in my head, I'm like, I have to make that appear like the sky is mixing into it. So what does that mean? Well, the sky is blue on a hue level. That's very easy to understand first and foremost. So blue is, if you look at my color picker, here I am here. Blue is roughly there, or like the sky blue is about there. So all I got to do is move this closer to the blue. That blue is going to motivate moving. Remember I said light is like a bully? The sky is a bully too, but it's weaker. It can't pull it all the way to itself because it's a weak bully. If the sky were as strong as the sun, then yes, it would pull that red all the way to the blue. But the sky can't do that. It's too weak. So it pulls it a little bit. I'll go somewhere here. I actually like to overshoot it and then press lightly on my stylus. So I'll go somewhere like in this range, which, remember, it started there. I'm going to go pull it all the way there. And then I'm going to raise the value because it needs to appear a lighter value than what's currently there on the sphere. And then I'll just scumble it in. And this looks like a red ball affected by a soft blue sky. And this is where your brush work will come into play. Like how much, how do you want the strokes to look? How do you want the blending to look? What are the edges like? Generally speaking, and edges are kind of a different fundamental lesson, but fundamentally speaking, ambient light is softer because it comes from different directions. Like that skylight is coming from different directions. That will cause soft edges generally, whereas direct light is uniform. It comes from, its rays are parallel, right? The sun is shining parallel rays. So that will cause harder edges generally. So I'm just cognizant that when I paint this sphere, I get softer edges in the ambient areas. And there we go. There's our ball. And there is one last section. It's where the line between the light and shadow is, this line here. That's called halftone. Halftones can be a bit darker and a bit closer to the local color because halftones are in light, but not because they're turning away from the light. They're not as bullied by the light. So to paint a halftone for this sphere, I'll pick where my light is. I always like to pick where I'm at first. I know the ball was red, so I'll go toward the red a little bit and obviously a bit darker for halftone because the form is going away from the light, so it's a bit darker, but not dark enough to be in shadow. I know Stan has talked all about this on his videos. And then I'll just put in this halftone right in there. Artists love to make the halftones a bit more saturated, especially in forms. This is a little visual trick that can be appealing to look at for some reason. Better to go more saturated than less. I don't know why. It's just something that works.
It just pops. There's something about that, like little hit on that Terminator line.
That's right. Yeah. Terminator. People call it the Terminator line, which I never learned that word. So when I learned it, all I could picture is Arnold when I hear it. Yeah. Hasta la vista, light shape. There we go. So there's your Terminator. Or no, well, there's your halftone leading into the Terminator line, leading into the shadow. And then from here, if you wanted a highlight, you could go ahead and like throw in a little highlight if you wanted, if the sphere had the right material for a highlight. Generally, objects don't have such sharp highlights, though.
Yeah, it's definitely something. If you guys at home, if you're ever curious to just see the way that light plays with each other, different things, you can do just some simple tests with like your phone flash. Just turn that thing on, move it closer to an object, and see how it being farther and closer to something makes such a massive difference for how that light affects things. It's really interesting to just do that, play with it, and then do it once every like couple of years. Just remind yourself. I do think. Do you want to dive into the piece that you're finishing?
Yeah,
and then I can give you a couple of questions here and there.
Yes, that demonstration took longer than planned, but hey, we're here for a few hours, so it's okay.
Oh, that's good. We'll just rename the stream afterwards to just like some saturation masterclass with Marco Bucci.
That would probably get more clicks, actually.
So yeah, I guess there were a couple different questions that people had. Just real quick, if people do want to follow you to get more tidbits of wisdom here and there, where are you on social media?
My socials are Bucci blog, Bucci blog, Bucci blog. It's for some reason what I picked. I'm on Instagram there, and I post. My Instagram account is only art, so I'd recommend if you want to follow me, Instagram's the best place. Obviously, my YouTube channel, I have tons of lessons on there. That's youtube.com/Marco Bucci, which is just my full name. I'm on Twitter too, but my Twitter is more like day-to-day life stuff, so probably less interesting to people. But I'm Bucci blog on Twitter as well.
Okay.
But yeah, Instagram and YouTube are the two main spots.
Yeah, just in case people wanted that casual education every once in a while.
Sure. If you want to see my woodworking projects, go to Twitter.
So right now, you're at this stage where you said you're about 80% with this piece,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
What would you say are the next steps? And do you like backtrack at all at this stage to kind of like reconsider the different forms that you've made or any colors?
So good question. I'll answer the second part first.
Mhm.
No, I don't backtrack on forms. Because I try and get them in very early. If you
Mhm.
saw the first hour of this piece, it was all form. Getting like, for example, getting the monster to look round that way, round that way, uh, positioning the shapes of the girl here to figure out exactly where she could mesh in with the monster shapes. Uh, Getting the basic big shapes, like this big shadow shape of him needs to be a nice big shape. And that's where I say it's 80% done. I don't love the way these flowers break up the shadow. That's why they're so roughly painted right now, because I'm not thinking of them as finished flowers right now. I need to think of them first as shapes. So like, these flowers are kind of floating in space. That's because I need to be able to either keep them or murder them right away. And there's no use painting something fully rendered if you're just going to paint over it in the next 5 minutes, right? So I want to make sure that when I interrupt this big shadow shape with flowers, that I am not interrupting the fact that it is a nice big round shape.
Mhm.
Uh, I'll show you some shapes. I'll show you where I'm not going to call it backtrack, but I will call it editing, continuous editing, is the shadow shape on the belly. Fundamentally, I wanted the shadow shape on the belly to be what you see here, which is like, fundamentally, I want it to be this nice round shape. But I can't just do that because the tree would not do that. The tree would cast all kinds of like scattered shadows on his belly, right? But I don't love the shape I've got, because here's an example of, I think I've broken this shape, this nice half moon shape, let's say.
Mhm.
I think I've broken that too much. The DNA of that shape is now gone. But thankfully, this is where painting on one layer is nice. I can just go in there and just start moving this around. And this is where the painting is only 80% done. All of these, let's say, smaller shape considerations, I have not committed to them yet. There's a lot of room for me to explore still. And honestly, what I do with these paintings, because this is just a personal painting for my own edification, I'll post it on social media and stuff when I'm done, but I'm painting this just for my own benefit. That's not for a client or anything. What I'll do with this kind of stuff is just, honestly, it take me like a month to do it, because I'll just load it up whenever I can. Like I'm busy with some other jobs and stuff. I'll load this up whenever I can. Maybe it's in the morning with some coffee, or at night before bed. Generally, those are the two times that I work on this stuff. And I'll just tweak away at it. And I'll spend an hour like just playing with these little shape decisions and saying like, how about if the tree like casts a shadow up onto the face? Does that work? Like, or does that look like chicken pox or something?
Mhm.
And I'll just play with these ideas and then get rid of it. If I see potential, I'll explore it. If not, I'll get rid of it. Yeah, but the shapes I do like, I really do like the shadow shape on this part of him. That's a nice, but to me, it's like a quarter moon. That's a nice shape. And I like the color. I like that variety. I've got some, well, here's where I can actually do something interesting. Right now, the temperature, there are various color temperatures mixed in there, but watch this. I can ask myself, like, where would the most green reflected light be? And probably it would be on this part of the shadow, because the sun would be coming down, striking the green ground, and bouncing up here. I don't think there would be much green up here, or there'd be less of it, because this would be more available to the sky. Probably skylight would be coming down and hitting here. So what I'll probably do, and that's why I've chosen so many blues on his belly, right? Because it's his belly, it faces the sky, just like our sphere earlier. So that motivated my blue greens up in the belly. You can see if I sample the belly colors, they're blue green, right? I'll make my color picker a bit bigger. We've got this. I can go bluer, scumble it in, and then I can ask I can start testing saturation. How saturated can I go before it's too much? And what I like to do, and here's a little saturation tip, trick maybe, start with kind of medium saturation. You can see generally as I sample around, I'm kind of in this range of gray, and start there. And that provides an excellent base for then increasing the saturation a little bit more or a lot more, depending on your taste, and try and zap it in. Like, just find little snippets where you can, again, scumble like this, where I can scumble in that extra bit of saturation it adds so much sweetness to it. But just like candy, too much sweet is no good.
Mhm.
So you have to make sure that your sweetness is controlled by grays. So you can think of saturation as sugar if you want, and the grays are your vegetables. I've never said that analogy before, by the way.
Yeah, I was like, I don't know. It felt like it was being invented on the fly, but it's a strong one.
I'm just trotting it out there, see how it lands.
So yeah,
yeah.
What would you say is your next step if you're doing this just for you without consideration for a client, like from this stage?
My next step is organizing, just shape organization. So like I'm zooming out. Usually I paint at about this scale on my monitor. Like I don't do this, for example. I can't see the relationship of anything except for what's directly in front of me. I need to see the whole picture. I also love to have the navigator window open, which I actually don't right now. This window here, I have two monitors. So I throw this window on my other screen, and honestly, I look at that window just as much as this window, or I'll just zoom out like this. The other really helpful thing is to flip it and work on it like that. And flipping it will help you see if things are readable or not. So the question was, what's my next steps in terms of like finishing this for a personal piece?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I have a different answer for that. It's just maximizing the fun brushwork. So like, you know, I really like right now how these eyes look. I think those are done. I like I know it's, to some this is messy, but to me it's interesting. It's energetic. But when you look at it as a whole, it's still a white eyeball with clear form. Like I always want the form to be clear. That eye needs to look like a round ball. If I'm drawing over the form, it's like a ball, right? But so you enjoy it on a form level, but I also want you to be able to enjoy it on an abstract painting level, as though if the painting were just this, that's interesting. You know, I want that to be interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So that takes a long time for me. That may not be a consideration for someone else. Some other, it's totally a valid idea to just not have that. Maybe you don't want the brushstrokes to call attention to themselves. I just happen to want that. So it adds a lot of time, of course, because I got to kind of go over every little bit of the painting and say like, okay, is this interesting? Is it fun? This rock wall here, is it, you know, I want every little piece to be its own little abstract bit of expression.
Mm-hmm.
One thought I just want to get back to, because I kind of stopped, the green bounce. So I can grab like an overlay brush, which I have right there. This is just an airbrush set to overlay. So it kind of looks like this, right? If I'm painting, I can like greenify things. I can increase the amount of green maybe right here. But, you know, maybe like I don't even know if this shows up in the stream, but just a small change toward green. And then maybe I can couple that with a change toward blue up here, because there's more sky there. And maybe I'll work with it. And then what I'll do is maybe a good thing, a helpful trick for me is I'll overdo it. Like I'll do this, that's overdone, but I'll now work into that. So I'll pick where I'm at. I always like to pick where I'm at, so I kind of know. And then I'll gray it, which, as you know, warms it up. And look at that. That gray looks like a purple, right? As I kind of put that in, it kind of looks like a purple almost, but it's absolutely not. It's that color. But when I'm painting it against the other colors, it kind of looks purple, which is kind of like on the warmer side of this. So I like that. I'll just play with these things. And it honestly makes it difficult for me to evaluate when a painting is done. I do struggle with that. But honestly, when a painting is done for me is when the shapes generally work. You're never going to get every little shape to work, but is when as many shapes as possible work. And obviously the fundamental shapes have to work. It can't be done before that. And then it's when I get sick of it. When I get sick of working on it and I want to move on, that's when it's done.
There were a couple questions earlier. We got real caught up in the demos earlier. So I'm going to revisit some questions from earlier.
Please, yeah.
But yeah, one of a couple of different questions kind of played together. A person asked, how do you know, are there ways that you would recommend getting to look at this piece with fresh eyes? And how do you know when it's done or good?
Okay, well, the done part we just went over, so that part I think is answered. How do you look at it with fresh eyes? The number one thing is flipping it, and flip it upside down too. Make sure you flip it upside down like this, because like this really helps, because I can see again, this is going to be a personal reaction, but this shape here doesn't make sense to me as a design. I don't see like that needs to be, I want rhythmically, I like this shadow shape here, and I kind of want a rhythm to be apparent. Like I want lines to be implied by my shadows, which will help the perspective. It helps the flow of the composition. So I flipping it upside down, which honestly I haven't done in a few hours. So thank you to the questioner for prompting me to do this. I will tweak this. Even I'll paint it upside down because to me, I don't care what I'm painting here. I'm painting composition right now. So this helps give you a fresh look over your work. And I don't think I need these leaf shapes here because I think it's more valuable rhythmically in the composition to show off the monster silhouette there. I'll try and tweak it so it's as nice of a curve as I can get, that it's continuous. I want this nice continuous rhythm, I call it, when you can see how these leaves are blocking the monster. But if this shape, if this line can be connected to that line just mentally, that's called, to me, I call that continuous rhythm. And I want that continuous rhythm to be evident. I want that monster to feel like a giant egg shape. So now that I'm upside down here and I'm seeing this in a more abstract way, because that's what happens when you flip a painting upside down, is I can get this continuous rhythm. I can work on this. So depending on how you're seeing your painting will maybe dictate what you're working on. And then I flip paintings upside down all the time. But I have to admit, on this one, I hadn't done it in a while. So thank you to that. And what was the third part to that question, Stephen?
I think you've nailed all the things in that one personally. Cool. I do think that you flipping it upside down does highlight a little bit of what you were talking earlier. You want to have like overlapping forms, but those flowers do kind of change the suggestion of that shadow.
They do, yeah. So honestly, at this point, well, I'll probably do this on a layer, but I'll just obliterate that shadow and say like, okay, like this is what I want. I want this shape. How can I get that but still have some flowers? And probably the answer is just have fewer flowers. So what I might do is, actually, here's what I might do. I'll probably, from my original painting, I'll duplicate what I had, lay it over the top. And because this is now on a layer, I'll just erase out that layer, revealing the shadow shape I clarified underneath. I'll just start doing this. So like how many flowers is good, you know? And this is where reference comes in. In fact, I shot a piece of reference on my, embarrassingly, that's my property. That's not supposed to be grass. It's kind of this landscaping thing. It's still in progress. Anyway,
embarrassingly, I own a home. This is good, Marco.
Yeah, this is not the lawn that's visible. This is landscaping in the back that we're still working on. So, but on a reference level, I'm just like, how does nature clump flowers? Like you see how there's these clumps. Like this is a beautiful little clump right there. And like there's kind of scattered here because like flowers grow, like these flowers grow where the seeds land, right? And because of wind patterns, they're going to grow in clumps, not randomly equal. And I like to reference nature for that kind of thing. I also really like how you can see like the dirt, like the brownish dirt, the earthy colors through this, but you can also see some greens. This helps me evaluate like how much skylight is the grass getting in shadow. Obviously, you can do this with your eyes, and I love. This would be a great subject for a plein air painting because it's just there's so much little information there you can capture. Look at the ambient occlusion under that bridge there. This is like the walkway. Look how dark it is. That's ambient occlusion. The ambient light being occluded by being in a very tight space. Anyway.
Then people did have a couple questions about this character and whether you have a story when you go into a painting every time, or if you just kind of jump into the painting and make a painting for its own sake.
Good question. Yes, I do have a story insofar as the story is like a one sentence thing. So for me, it's they're enjoying a summer day. Like that's the story. It's nothing more complex than that. But wrapped up in that sentence is all kinds of many years of my own memories, including today, like in my experience today of enjoying a summer day. Like, what does that feel like to me? And I need that to come through in the painting. So on a character acting level, like the posing, they are enjoying a summer day. And what does that physically look like? Well, maybe, the girl is presenting a little wildflower that she picked, isn't like, the sweet little gesture. Like, hey, look at this. Like my daughter does this all the time. She'll pick a little flower and give it to me. It's this super sweet thing that she does. And I totally used that for this character. And then, of course, the monster being an innocent puppy dog, he is fascinated and so happy to be presented this flower. So that is wrapped up in the story. And the posing, and I mentioned this earlier, because I focus on this first, the posing comes later. This girl originally was reading a book, but that didn't work so well because she was disconnected from the monster. So on a story level, enjoying a summer day is less about reading a book and more about maybe playing with your friends. Like that's how I'm thinking about it in terms of like a childhood experience, which I want this to evoke. So I changed it to them interacting more. And I had all these flowers. I'm like, well, she could easily pick one and present it. So yes, a story is always present in my mind when I paint this stuff. A story does not have to be present when I'm studying. Then I don't need a story because I'm just studying the effects of light, like at the sphere example I did, or the plein air stuff I do outdoors. Then a story does not need to be present, although it can help. And I don't have a story in mind if I'm just doing like a landscape concept sketch. Then unless it's for a film or something, but if I'm just painting away on a landscape, I don't really have a story. But anything with characters, yes, I have a pretty clear idea for let's call it the emotional beat that I want to hit. If you think about like film lingo, what is the emotional beat? Yeah.
So while you're doing this, I promise I just asked him, guys. He didn't say anything. They really, really want to know the name of the monster. They won't stop asking about the name of the monster.
Guys, he doesn't have a name. I'm so sorry. I don't know what to name him. I've been painting this green monster. Let me see if I can quickly navigate my hard drive here. I've been painting this green monster since 2010, I think. So we're going on 13 years now. Here's one. Yeah. Okay. So there's the book one. I used the book idea there. Yeah. That's also why I didn't want to use the book here because I've used that a few times. Yeah, there's more, but hang on. Let me just go here to work. Oh, sorry, guys. Right here. Okay. I think the first one. Yeah, this was the first one I ever did. This one, playing hide and seek. You notice his
longer mouth.
Yeah, longer mouth. His proportions are different, right? He had smaller eyes at first, a longer mouth, which I like. I like the longer mouth. I kept these two like big teeth. Those are always there. Very messily painted in that one, but he's got these two big teeth. So I've been painting him for so long, and to me, I just think of him as his name to me is Green Monster. No name could replace that in my own head now. Like I can't replace that name.
He looks like a Hugo to me. But I understand.
I like Hugo. That's good. I mean, it's a cute name.
Well, plus he's nice and saturated. So
he's very saturated. So look at this one. I pulled this up, right? The color considerations. See that the top of his head is very much bluer than the bottom. That's the sky, right? That's the sky, the blue of the sky, making the greens blue-green. And the bottom is more earthy green. If I sampled it, yeah, the bottom is more earthy green because it is getting warmer reflected light from the sun. But notice the sun color itself. I kind of thought of this as like a early, like a morning kind of scene. Notice the sun colors are these yellows. I think of a morning sun as being very pastel-y yellow. So the greens in sunlight are very pastel yellow. And then I'm allowed to go into more like this range of green for the shadows. Again, the shadows have a much bigger opportunity to get colors from everywhere because they get sky colors, reflected sun colors, reflected colors from different objects, and all those mixed together, right? And you have all kinds of varieties in shadows. This is covered in depth in my class, but that's why the monster's colors appear the way they do. But yeah, Hugo, I like it, Stephen. I like it.
So a person was asking about like the foundational stages of things.
Yeah.
They were asking if, sorry, I kind of lost that here. They were asking if they should paint with strict color palettes beforehand or figure the color palette as they go.
That's a good question. Okay. I figure out the color as I go, but in my earlier years of painting, I always had a palette that I stuck to. Now, I also am trained traditionally. I started with oil paint and watercolor and acrylic, basically all the traditional media, watercolor, acrylic, wash, oil. I like them all. I still like them all. And what you can do with traditional media is have a physical palette that you are limited to. You might have heard the term limited palette, right? If you practice that way, you gain a more direct understanding of what colors are possible in a certain set of palette. And that is hugely beneficial that honestly, I don't think you can do digitally. You can't learn that digitally because you are never constricted to a palette. Even if you say, okay, I'm only going to use blue, purple, and red or whatever. Sure, you can do that, but because you're still picking colors on a picker rather than physically mixing them with pigment, you won't really learn the same lessons. You can absolutely learn to paint just digitally, but I give a great deal of consideration to what I learned from traditional, being limited to a certain set of colors in my palette. Usually it was like 4 or 5 colors of different, there's so many different ways. There's like the Zorn palette. There's like the split complementary palette. There's all kinds of palettes that you can learn about. Some of those palettes are actually covered in my class as well. But that really helped me because now when I'm painting digitally where I have access to every color, I can say, oh, if I were painting this in oils, these are the greens I could get. And I know my way around the picker as a result. So in terms of picking certain colors, traditional study really will help you. And you can keep a palette in mind beforehand that way. If you're just working straight digital and you don't have that kind of study under your belt, then I would try and find colors as I go using the logic about understanding the light source versus the shadow and stuff like that.
There were a couple questions that people had about the brushes that you choose to use. Is this something that you do go over in the course?
My course comes with brushes.
Ooh.
It comes with, see this folder called favorites. Well, some of these I didn't make myself, so I can't share them. But honestly, my brush selection is not that sophisticated. I like to use, if anyone here has an Adobe subscription, you have access to Kyle Webster's brushes. I really like his round watercolor, which is that, and his flat watercolor, which is that. And these are Kyle Webster's brushes. They speed up when you paint smaller. And then brushes I've made that I've shared are like, I like this little fuzzy brush, and I like this charcoal brush, and I love the round brush, which is here. And I like to set that round brush to multiply, which kind of does this for me. I love the multiply round brush because it's very quick to block out shadows. Like I can merge this down. Yeah, let me merge this down here. Notice I'm trying to find a spot for that arm there. Actually, let me keep the arm on a layer. Let me merge everything else down. I really like the round brush on multiply mode because it's like watercolor where you paint, it only goes darker. So I love maybe finding like what's a shadow shape that I can get at here. Like this to me is already a nice pattern, like these lines, right? So yeah, the round brush. And like those are, I just showed you like 5 or 6 brushes. Honestly, 90% of my painting is just with those. I have a bunch of scatter brushes here. Like, like this guy makes a bunch of strange shapes. I can't remember where I got that brush from, but it's nice, but I don't use it a whole lot. I use it for I might use it to like scatter some flower shapes randomly. Like that kind of looks okay. And then I'll work with my regular brushes into that. Yeah. Well, hopefully that helps clarify.
Yeah. If you guys are interested in that course or any of those brushes or anything, the thing that brings us all here today is that there is that sale going on. If it is June of 2023, if you're watching this later, it's not happening now, but maybe there's a different sale. That has it being 20% off if you use that code kangaroo. But you'll see that on the website if you go there. And you do have a couple different courses that are on there. This one in particular is one that has a specific focus, but you're a well-versed art man.
Yeah, this one is the color survival guide, the one we're kind of talking about here. And it's kind of A to Z what I think about color, like how I manage it, how I pick colors, how you can study color. And it'll be friendly for beginners right up to advanced. It's kind of goes through the gamut. And the nice thing about color, though, is that even advanced color stuff is, you can understand it when someone explains it to you visually. Even if you're not at an advanced level yourself, it's good to understand where you can go with color. And the thing with color is, again, like, let's call it intellectually, it's actually quite easy to understand. Doing it is harder. But if you watch someone explain it, and I do my best to do that in my course and on my YouTube channel as well, you can probably understand it. You can probably watch the whole class and say, oh, I totally get that. And then you can spend then the necessary time to implement it in your work, which is what takes longer.
Mm-hmm. So we are at about half an hour in, or half an hour left, rather.
Cool.
There's a part on your screen, Marco. If you want to hit that little hide button on that UI you got,
Where?
It'll yeah.
Oh,
Has anyone looking at that thing?
I didn't realize I could do that.
Yeah, it was under the part of my screen, so I didn't see it for so long.
Oh, sorry, folks. I didn't realize that was there. Even though it was right in front of my face, I didn't see it.
So yeah, for this one, are there any things that you want to try to make sure and get in this last little half hour?
Let me see. I'm just looking at my other screen.
I like that you had gone over the steps that you would take to make sure that this is a complete piece from here on out. Like flipping your screen, trying to make sure that those different shapes are consistent. Making sure that all of the shapes are even worth it. Were there other things that you would do at this point? Do you add texture at this stage, or is texture just happening throughout?
Texture's happening throughout. That's a good question. I build texture. Yeah, I build texture as I go because I paint. You can see like a bunch of round brush strokes there versus like there's some watercolory strokes and some scatter strokes. I use within a limited range. Again, the brushes I use I only have like 6 or 7 of them that I commonly use, but I do change brushes a lot to get the different various textures from them. One thing I did in this painting, you see like in the eye, each little shape has like a little border around it.
Mm-hmm.
That is simply the, in Photoshop anyway, the stroke effect. I've got a layer here and I turned on stroke and I've got it a value of 2 pixels with pretty low opacity. So when I paint a brush stroke, it comes with a little line there around the form. And to me that, around the stroke. And to me, that reminds me of watercolor, like how pigment pools up in watercolor, which is how I kind of came up with this technique digitally. It's a very strange thing to do, but it does help. Like if I'm painting a flower on that layer, like I'll zoom way in. If I'm painting a flower, just that little line kind of helps the flower have a little bit more definition, almost like the illusion of detail, maybe. So that's something I'll do as a trick. I certainly don't do it all the time, and sometimes I won't do it at all. But in this painting, because there's a lot of like suggested detail in here, I will do that. You can see sometimes sorry, Stephen.
You're good.
One last thing. Sometimes I'll like build up random textures. Like the start of this, I'll like just put random stuff on the canvas like that, and I'll paint into it, and that can promote texture as well.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, texture is happening the whole way right from the start.
Okay. Someone was also asking. So you're kind of working on a limited layer set where sometimes you see other people who are doing digital paintings just go to town. They've just got buckets and buckets of layers.
Yeah.
Is this indicative of your normal process? And when do you choose to actually make a different layer versus flattening them?
Yeah, it is indicative of my normal process. I don't like to use layers. Again, this kind of harkens back to my training in oil and watercolor and stuff, because you don't have layers there, at least not in the same way you do in digital. Mm-hmm. So I'm used to committing to decisions like that you have to do when you're working on layers, working without layers. Sorry. When I do use layers is when I'm experimenting with something. So like his arm, you see how remember how I'm reworking his arm here. I like the shape that was there. Like I like those shapes. So when I put an arm there, I want to make sure that I have the option of preserving the shapes if I have to reverse course. So yeah, I'll use a layer when I'm like in risky territory composition wise. But the only other time I'll use a lot of layers is if it's a very art direction, if it's a project edited by a different art director, like a client, basically. If I'm working for a client who's going to have a lot of opinions on the painting, then I'll try and put things on layers. But I'll still keep it as few as possible. So if I were to put this on layers, if I were to have painted this on layers, I would have put the monster and girl on its own layer, but just one, the monster and girl on one. And I would have put like the grassy ground on one and the flowers on one. Probably that's what I would have done. I don't like to put like, oh, the light of the face on here and the shadow of the monster on there. And suddenly you have those buckets of layers that you're talking about, Stephen. Mm-hmm. I don't like that because then suddenly just my limited brain space, I suddenly have to like go to my layers window and pick one out. I don't like doing that.
Yeah.
I just like to paint on the canvas. And it's it's actually a common thing for me to run into problems there where if I am working on layers, I will always paint on the wrong layer because I dislike so much going back to my layers window and figuring out which layer I should be painting on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really easy to get caught up in the different things that digital allows you to do. And I think trying to like mimic the process of something that's traditional typically helps make stronger art.
Yeah, traditional has been, honestly, if anyone here has not tried any traditional media, try it, especially with painting. Honestly, you will learn so much. It'll be very uncomfortable at first if you've never tried it, but stick with it for even a few weeks and paint simple subjects, very simple subjects, and you will learn, honestly, you will learn a lot. I remember painting a study of this one. This was a background painting from Beauty and the Beast. I remember doing studies of this, just simple, warm and cool, warm light, cool shadow, you know, just simple stuff like that.
Yeah, it makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah.
People had asked very early on about a book that you had. You showed it.
Imaginary Places.
It was there was a girl dancing in a hall or a prom.
Oh, Nutcracker?
Yeah. So someone was asking about this. I don't know if they're still here, but if they are, what was this?
That was a book I painted for Disney, the Nutcracker. It was a book adaptation of the movie.
Well,
that was probably the best project I ever got to work on, like as a professional, because they let me paint the way I wanted to paint, which is like this. But obviously I was painting the movie subject matter. So I was sent, the movie wasn't out yet, so I couldn't see the movie, like NDA stuff, right? They couldn't send it to me, but they did send me on-set photography. So I had beautiful photographs of all the actors and like the sets and how everything looked in the movie, but I just didn't see the movie itself, which was actually a blessing too, because all the scenes are my own. Like when when I'm painting scenes from the movie, I painted them the way that I imagined them using, on-set photography that I was sent. So that book is probably the funnest I ever had as a professional artist, was that project for that reason. And the fact that I could paint how I wanted to.
Yeah, no, I think there's something freeing, like you said, about not having to adhere strictly to the reference. Like you got to build up that a lot.
Yeah, like if they had sent me the movie, probably I would have started copying movie frames, and that would have been way less fun. Like I would have had to actively tell myself not to do that. But here that wasn't even an option. I didn't have the movie.
So if a person had asked, what makes you gravitate towards the halftone brushes that you use in the semi-realistic paintings?
Oh yeah, so I do have this other set called Halftone. And this is also a Kyle Webster thing. They look like this. They're all these, do a better one. They're all these like, strange like dotty patterns. And there's so many of them. I really like these brushes I haven't used them at all on this painting, by the way, but I do really like them for their implied texture. Like I use the halftone brushes a lot in the Nutcracker project, for example. I like the way they break up shapes. So like on this here, just to show you, it's probably, okay, well, this is way too low res. Let me just raise the res. Let's go like here. I like the way that the halftone brushes can kind of invade shapes, but in a textural way, if that makes sense. Like I'll play with, unfortunately in my Photoshop thing, they all look the same. I really don't like that, but there we go. It's like I'll play with little invasions of fun brushstrokey texture like that, and then I can use my smudge tool to work into those. And I find that I can get a lot of interesting brushwork that way by using really kind of off what's the word, brushes from left field, let's say, off kilter brushes like that, unexpected brushes, and then work into them. But brushwork is all about edges, hard, firm, soft, lost edges. I have videos about this on my YouTube channel, and Proko has videos about this. If brushwork for me is just controlling that, so whatever brush I'm using in my head, I'm like, is this brush giving me a soft edge, a hard edge, or a firm edge, or a razor sharp edge, or a lost edge? Which is it? And to me, the halftone brushes kind of give me the effect of a soft edge because it's like a broken sort of thing, but it gives me a soft edge in a hard brushstroke way. Does that make sense? And I really like that visual impact. I just like the way that looks. So I use those brushes a lot, but they're not intended for that use. I'm pretty sure when Kyle Webster made them, they were they're more for like imitating comic book printing, but I use it as a painterly tool all the time.
Yeah, I remember when he released those. I think that that was before they were a Photoshop.
Yes,
like before he was affiliated.
That's right, and I bought them at that time. 2016 was the year. I don't know how I remember that because I had just moved. I just moved. That's why, and then I got those brushes right after that.
So I think here in this last 20 minutes, guys, if you do have any specific questions, some of the things that people are going to ask are going to be things that have already been addressed in the stream. So you guys in the chat, please try to give them an answer for those kind of things, but I'll pull the ones that are newer.
Sure. And while you do, I just want to just quickly take 10 seconds to say that my earlier studies, I just had it. I did a lot of like studies like this. Here we go. A lot of this where it's like an environment with a beam of sunlight striking through. Because what that allowed me to do was very easily separate what's in light versus what's in shadow. Like I kind of art directed this sunlight beam splitting the scene. And I knew very easily that anything in here was light and anything in here and here was shadow. So it helped me deal with light versus shadow. It's something I did a lot in my early days, is kind of contriving lighting situations like that. Okay, go ahead, Stephen.
It's going to take a little bit. They're on a little bit of a lag from us.
Oh, okay.
People did have some questions that were about good exercises for practicing values and understanding color theory, but I think those are kind of covered by what you said earlier or more in-depth things.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's it for right now. I guess, yeah, there was one. People are asking if you've ever had any interesting interactions with people while drawing scenery on location.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I love that. That was a huge hurdle for me at first. It may not come across on camera, but I'm pretty introverted. Like I'm interacting online with you guys, to me, doesn't fall into the introverted category because like I'm still alone in my room. Even when I'm on stage doing a lecture in person, I'm still alone on stage. I do my best when I'm alone because I'm an introvert. When I'm outdoors, you're an introvert, it can be very awkward. And I hated painting outdoors when I started because first of all, I wasn't very good. And second of all, I didn't want to talk to anyone. And when you're an artist outdoors, everyone wants to talk to you. So I remember like really struggling to get over that. What helps is when you get better with art and suddenly people really like what you're doing, that helps because it's a little ego boost. But it's still a painful experience when you're out there and it's not working. And if someone's walking by, you're like, oh, don't look. But funny experiences. Here's my favorite one. I was painting just some build. I was on a street painting and I was like 5 o'clock. So people are getting off work. Right. And some guy in a full business suit stops to talk to me and we're chatting for a few minutes and it's all cool. It's all good. And I spill my painting water all over his pants.
Oh no.
Yeah. I was like, I'm so sorry, sir. I didn't know what to do. Like, what am I going to do? Offer to wash his pants? I can't do that.
I mean, no, the thing is you already had washed his pants
with a nice cobalt blue.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh man. And they were like,
how did he choose to react to this? Like,
was super cool.
Okay.
He was very cool. I think he probably rushed home and threw them in the wash immediately.
Was he cobalt blue? Was he cool, super cool because of the cobalt blue?
Yeah. He's like, oh, my pants look like the sky. No, but it went all over like his shin. Like it was so noticeable. He was wearing like almost like the color of my shirt here, like almost a beige sort of thing. And like a khaki sort of thing. And it was not good. I remember all I could do was like kind of laugh, but in a sheepish way. Like I didn't know how to react to that. Anyway, that was maybe the funniest one. The other one I can remember was, well, it's funny now. It wasn't really funny then, but the other one I can remember was, and this was hilarious. This guy was watching me from a distance, like 10 feet away. He was watching me and I knew he was watching me because I could feel his sight line. Right. And he was just there. And then after like several minutes, he decides to come right up to me, right in my face. He looks me dead in the eye and he's like, Picasso. And then he leaves. He just left. I just died laughing after he did that. I'm like, that is the weirdest interaction I've ever had out here.
I love this idea so much. Like a person just walks up to someone playing music and they're like, Taylor Swift.
Yeah.
And then walk away. Like, what is that?
Just that's the artist he could think of is Picasso. Yeah.
Yeah.
He
Wow.
didn't even really care to look at the work. Like, he came up to me from the front, so he couldn't see what I was doing. I'm sure he saw it before from 10 feet away, but yeah, just Picasso runs or walks away. I remember one guy really liked what I was doing and invited me to his like private chalet to like paint it.
What?
And I'm like, am I going to get murdered
Absolutely.
at this chalet? But I was like, he was like, are you interested? I'm like, yeah, sure. Email me and we'll figure out the terms. And then he never emailed me. So I didn't go to his chalet.
Dang. Yeah, that would be the first place I would go also, because that does absolutely sound like you're going to be taking part in the most dangerous game.
Yeah, exactly.
So there were a couple other questions here. Some of these, again, for those of you guys who did ask some of these questions and don't have them get asked, they are some things that we have gone over already. But there are some other things that people did ask.
And while you're doing that, Stephen, I want to point out some halftones on this figure.
Yeah.
Right in here. So the Terminator line where the light meets the shadow is like this, kind of a clean shape, right? Look at this area right in here. That's halftone. And notice I'm trying to finesse it with slightly more saturated colors. I'm also like making them a little more red, which is a graphic cheat. Nature wouldn't do that to greens, but I am doing it. There's also a halftone here, right here, where there's a plane change. This shape here, keep your eye on this shape here. If I were to go over the form color, it looks like this. Round, 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 and then it goes in and then back out. This in is a halftone. It's not enough to be shadow. See, if it was shadow, it would look way off. If I made this shadow, it's way too much of a form change. So it's not shadow. That looks like a shelf. It's halftone because it needs to be smooth. So I'm working that too. Okay, go ahead, Stephen.
A person had asked, how would you suggest to push through the mindset of, I need to learn to draw before I make a complete and polished illustration? They find themselves only doing exercises and only sketching. Do you have any advice for them?
Yes. I think the best thing you can do when it comes to making a finished illustration is pick a subject that you think is so easy that you can absolutely hit it out of the park, and then go hit it out of the park. My early illustrations were like boxy houses on a hill, that kind of thing, but very simply drawn. Like, basically houses made of boxes, right? And a box is nice because you can easily figure out where the light and shadow is because the boxes are made of hard edges, hard planes. So yeah, my advice, pick a subject that is so within your skill set currently that you could absolutely nail it. As simple as that is, it could be I remember doing plein air painting of cylindrical garbage cans just sitting on the sidewalk. Like almost anyone could draw that, right? Maybe a very beginner couldn't, but almost anyone with just a bit of experience could draw that, and then go ahead and see if you can really, really nail it. And then once you have those easier illustrations done, slowly dial up the difficulty. Add a bit to the landscape, add a bit to the design. If you're doing like these boxy houses, add a little bit to the design of the house, maybe add a spire or something. So raise the difficulty in small increments. That's what I did, because when I first started and I wanted to illustrate, my drawing skills weren't there yet either. And even today, I'm still learning tons of stuff. So yeah, that'd be my advice. And that's where honestly, where this monster was born from. He's such a simple shape that now when I invented this monster, I could draw more complex things than this monster, but I was just doodling on a little piece of paper, and I was just doodling this little egg shape, and I just gave him some eyes, and suddenly he turned into this 13 years of inspiration. You don't need to be overly complex.
Yeah, absolutely. I think definitely choose something that you can accomplish. Like even if it's a thing that you're like, oh no, I could have accomplished that like 5 years ago. Do it.
Yep.
Remind yourself. Sounds like you need it.
Yep. Sorry to talk over you, Stephen. Sorry.
Oh no, you're good. We're digital things.
Yeah.
Like 4 years now of. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No. You go ahead.
I guess I'm just gonna go ahead and ask this one last question here, and I think that we're good for final thoughts and wrapping up after it.
Sure.
But do you have any advice for telling better stories in a single illustration? You did talk about it a little bit, but I don't know if there's anything that you found to be a concrete law.
Well, I think the best thing I could say to that is, sorry for my sniffles, I have allergies.
All these flowers.
Yeah. Okay, what is my best advice there? make it so that your focal point is so unbelievably obvious that the person can't help but look at it. So like, this is a good example. There's no way a person is going to be fixated on this part when you have this big focal point here. So make sure your focal point has the most contrast. Again, let me throw this to grayscale. Make sure your focal point has the most contrast. So like the monster being the light, like look at the lightest of the monster, which is about here, meeting the darkest of the background, which is there. So like in the monster area, I've covering the whole gamut of values. That's not true anywhere else. Like over here in the background, if I'm sampling these, I'm only covering this range. So make sure your focal point, a good trick, that's not a rule, but a good concept, is to make sure your focal point has the most contrast. And then when you're posing your characters, make sure those poses do not require any zooming in to read. Mm-hmm. Make sure the actions presented are instantly familiar. And that is a drawing consideration, you know, with silhouettes and stuff. Like probably a good example is this painting I brought up before. Hang on, that's a different one.
I mean, that one's great too, though.
Oh, sorry. Oh, thanks. This one is, the other one had markups on it. So like this, right? The silhouette, and this is not something I've talked about yet, so this is good. If you look at like the way the silhouette goes, notice that it is very, like there's a lot of silhouette information there. I didn't bury the book in the monster. The book sticks out and her head sticks out of the book. Like and then the monster's head is its own shape. If you bury your silhouette information, it becomes harder to read because silhouette is a huge way that we read illustrations. So make sure your silhouettes are extremely clear and your contrast is high. That'll increase the likelihood of someone reading your work effectively. So like, for example, I love this piece of art. Absolutely love it. This is Walter Everett. I'm not going to say a single bad thing about it. So what I'm about to say is not a criticism, but this takes longer to read.
Absolutely.
That's fine. I absolutely love this painting. This painting takes longer to read because when I zoom out, Walter Everett is so good. He's designed everything to be very close in value. He's done that on purpose, and I love it for that. But this is not as fast as this. I'm not saying mine is better. It's just faster. His is slower by design. I've done paintings that are slower too, on purpose. But if you want your stuff to read quick, you need contrast and you need your focal point to have most of that contrast. Mm-hmm. If you don't do that, like Walter Everett, you can accomplish great things, but it'll be different. It'll be less of an instant thing. Like you might not even have noticed this female figure in the background.
Nope.
Yeah, Walter Everett is such a master, though. But once you see her, it's beautiful. Mm-hmm. But Walter Everett has hidden her on purpose. Don't hide your stuff on purpose. Do the opposite and get it clear on purpose. By the way, Walter Everett, one of my favorite painters, he has tons of work that is immediately clear as well. This is just one that was just one that I really liked for it going the opposite way. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. I guess, I don't know. For me, for final thoughts, I want to remind people that, again, all of the things that you've seen here are laid out in a structured and building on each other kind of way in the course that Marco does have on Proko. Well, courses plural. But for this one in particular, it is the one particular course. And you can get that for 20% off right now on Proko. Marco, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Stephen. This has been tons of fun. And thank you to everyone watching. I have no gauge on who's here and who's not here, but thank you if you are tuning in now or if you tuned in before and had to leave. Thank you guys for coming. It means a lot that I have access to an audience like this, honestly, and thank you so much. So thanks to the Proko guys for facilitating that, and I hope you guys like my teaching, and I hope it helps you. Truly, that's my main goal when I do this stuff, is that it helps you get over some roadblocks with your own art.
Mm-hmm. So yeah. Everyone have a good rest of your day out there. For anyone who it is very late right now, just go to bed. You can't make good art if you don't sleep. Drink some water, do your stretches. Marco, is there anything else you want to remind people to do to make good art?
Nope. Just keep practicing, keep swinging the axe. It'll happen for you. It took me several years to get to even a respectable level, so just keep going.
Okay. All right. Thank you guys so much. Have a good one, and see you.